93 warriors went in. None were supposed to come out. The bloodthirsty alphas had been collecting them for 7 days. Strong ones. Proud ones. Males who had led armies and females who had won wars. They were thrown into the hollow of ruin, a valley sealed on all 4 sides by stone walls laced with silver and ashroot. No wolf could shift there. No wolf could call for help. The walls were designed to kill hope before killing the body. Of the 93, 11 had already died. The rest were starving, bleeding, and waiting to be hunted for sport. There was one among them who had not spoken a single word since she arrived. Not one. They called her the Silent One. The Broken One. Some called her useless. She wore no armor. She carried no weapon. Her wrists were bound in silver cord that had burned dark scars into her skin. She sat in the corner of the hollow every night with her knees to her chest and her gray eyes open, watching, never sleeping. They did not know her name. They did not know what she was. On the 8th day, the bloodthirsty alphas opened the gates and sent in 20 armed hunters to finish what starvation had started. The warriors who had fought in 100 battles began to run. The Silent One stood up. She pulled the silver cord apart with her bare hands. And then the ground shook. If you are new here, subscribe now and turn on the bell so you never miss a story like this. Leave a comment telling us what you think will happen. We read every single one. Like this video and share it with someone who loves werewolf stories. Chapter 1. The Hollow of Ruin. The valley had no name on any official map of the Northern Wolf Territories. The bloodthirsty alphas had carved it out of the mountain range called the Grey Fangs 3 generations ago, long before the current alpha Lord Vareth came to power. It was not a dungeon. It was not a prison. It was a stage. Vareth enjoyed watching strong things break. He was a massive male, wide across the shoulders, with a jaw that looked carved from the same stone as the walls he had built. His hair was the color of coal and hung loose past his ears. His eyes were amber with a ring of deep red at the edge of the iris, a trait found only in wolves who had killed so many enemies that the blood had permanently stained their sight. He wore heavy furs over plates of black iron, and he stood on the ridge above the hollow every morning to watch the ones below. 93, he had counted on the day they sealed the valley. Warriors from 6 different packs. Generals, war commanders, battle-tested betas, and powerful alphas who had made the mistake of refusing his summons or standing in the path of his expansion. He wanted them broken before he killed them. He wanted every wolf in the north to hear the story of what happened to those who defied him. He wanted legends born in that valley, legends of his power and their helplessness. He had not expected the girl. She had been found in the village of Caldenmore, which his soldiers had swept through 6 days ago. The village was not strategic. It was small, mostly farmers and a handful of unmated Omegas who did weaving and healing work. His soldiers had taken the village elder, 2 beta guards, and the girl, mostly because she had been standing in the road when the soldiers arrived and had not moved when ordered to step aside. She did not fight. She did not plead. She simply looked at them. One of the soldiers, a young beta named Corin, had felt something cold move through him when her eyes met his. He had not told his commander this. He had instead bound her wrists in silver cord and thrown her in the cart with the others, telling himself the feeling meant nothing. Her name was Sable. She was 22 years old. She stood at medium height with a lean, whipcord build that looked too slight to be impressive. Her skin was deep brown, smooth, unmarked except for old thin scars that ran in faint parallel lines along her forearms. Her hair was dark and pulled back simply, and her eyes were an unusual shade of pale gray that seemed to catch light in places where there was no light to catch. She had not spoken since her capture. She had not spoken, in truth, for nearly 3 years. Not because she could not. Because she had chosen not to. Because the last time she had used her voice for something real, something had answered. Inside the hollow, the 93 survivors had organized themselves the way warriors always do. The dominant alphas took the high ground, the rocky ledge on the southern side that offered a view of the gate and some protection from the wind. The betas clustered in functional groups, pairing off and establishing small perimeters. The two Omegas who had been taken alongside warriors were kept in the center by custom, protected out of reflex rather than genuine care. Sable sat apart from all of them. She had found a crevice in the northern wall on the first night and put her back to the stone. The silver cord on her wrists still burned. She had not slept. She had eaten the scraps that some of the less prideful warriors had shared in the early days when they still believed help was coming, and she had watched everything with those pale gray eyes and said absolutely nothing. The largest alpha in the hollow was a male named Breck. He was from the Ironwood Pack, a territory known for producing physical fighters with almost no equal. Breck was enormous, nearly 7 feet tall in human form, with shoulders so wide he moved through the valley like a wall moving on its own. His red hair was braided back and his hands were the size of her head. He had killed 4 of the other warriors in the first 3 days, establishing dominance, before the starvation began to slow him down. Breck had noticed Sable on the second day. He had walked to her crevice and stared down at her with the kind of contempt that big males use on things they consider beneath acknowledgement. She had looked back at him and said nothing. He had waited, clearly expecting fear. Then he had spat near her feet and walked away. On the 4th day, a female warrior named Dessa had come to sit near Sable. Dessa was from the Stormcrest Pack, a commander who had led cavalry raids for 12 years. She was lean and dark-skinned with close-cropped natural hair and a jaw set in permanent determination. Her left arm had been broken in the initial capture and had healed badly without being set, leaving it slightly crooked but functional. Dessa did not try to make Sable speak. She simply sat beside her and described, quietly, what she observed. The guard rotation above the walls. The timing of the food drops. The composition of the warriors around them. Sable listened. After an hour, Dessa had said, quietly, "You are not what you look like, are you?" It was not a question. Sable had not answered, but she had looked at Dessa in a way that Dessa described to no one, but that she thought about for the rest of the time they had left. The dead had begun on the 5th day. The 11 who fell were not killed by the others. They died of wounds sustained during capture that had been left untreated, of thirst, of the particular despair that consumes a warrior who understands with certainty that they will not be rescued. The valley was designed to produce that understanding. Vareth had chosen it carefully. On the 7th night, the remaining 82 gathered near the gate. They had found a rotted section of fencing along the eastern wall and worked at it in rotation, scraping with shards of stone, taking turns through the night. By dawn, they had created an opening the width of a fist. Wide enough to pass a message through. Not wide enough to escape. Breck had shoved a torn piece of cloth through the gap, stained with the blood of one of the dead. He believed someone beyond the wall would find it and understand. He believed, still, that they were important enough to be rescued. Sable had watched this from her crevice and known it would not work. She had known for days that no rescue was coming. She had known, too, what was going to come instead. On the morning of the 8th day, the gate above the valley opened. 20 hunters descended the stone steps cut into the wall. They were Vareth's elite fighters, dressed in black iron with silver-tipped lances and short swords coated in ashroot extract that would slow any wolf's healing. They moved in formation, precise and unhurried, spreading out across the valley floor with the calm of men doing a task they had done many times. The warriors scattered. Some tried to shift and could not, the silver and ashroot in the walls suppressing the change. Some grabbed rocks and fought back with their hands. Breck caught the first hunter to reach him and snapped the man's lance in half before 3 others drove him back with their silver tips. Dessa was moving toward the eastern wall, pulling 2 younger warriors with her, trying to reach the gap they had made. Sable stood up. She raised her bound wrists and looked at the silver cord. The burns beneath it were deep, pink at the edges, raw in the center. She had worn this cord for 8 days. In the normal way of things, silver cord would hold any wolf, suppress the bond between their human self and their animal, keep them fully, helplessly human. The cord was not built for what she was. She closed her eyes. She heard, in the deep part of herself where she had kept it locked and silent for 3 years, the first low note of her bloodline beginning to wake. She did not speak the word she was thinking. She did not need to. The silver cord snapped. Not in one place. In 7 places simultaneously. The pieces fell to the ground and the burns on her wrists sealed shut in the span of 3 breaths. The hunter nearest to her stopped moving. He had been 10 feet away, advancing on a young beta who had fallen. He stopped because the air around the silent girl in the corner of the valley had changed in a way he could not explain. The temperature dropped. The wolves nearby turned instinctively. Even in the middle of their panic and their fight, something ancient in their blood made them turn and look. Sable opened her eyes. They were no longer pale gray. They were silver, pure and luminous, with a ring of deep violet at the edge of each iris. The ground shook once, and the hollow of ruin, which had been designed to trap and kill and break, recognized what stood in it and was afraid. Chapter 2. The Blood That Does Not Break. There is a lineage that the great packs do not teach their young. They do not teach it because they are afraid of it. They scrubbed it from their histories 300 years ago, burned the texts that described it, executed the scholars who had spent their lives studying it. They called the bloodline dangerous. They called it unstable. What they meant was that they could not control it, and what they could not control they did not want their children to know existed. The bloodline had many names across the centuries. In the old northern tongue it was called Vareth, which translated roughly as the line that does not bow. In the southern territories it had been called the hollow blood, not for weakness, but because those who carried it were hollow of ordinary limitation. In the common tongue that all packs shared now, it had one name that survived, whispered in the oldest parts of old forests by wolves who still remembered their grandmothers saying it like a prayer. They called it the Omega Prime. An Omega Prime was not simply a wolf born at the lower end of the rank spectrum. The rank system that all modern packs used, the Alpha at the top, the Omega at the bottom, the Betas and Gammas and Deltas in between, that system was a human construction layered over something much older. In the oldest wolf bloodlines, before the rank system existed, there had been a different kind of power entirely. The Omega Prime carried within her the first power. Not the power of physical strength or command or the fear scent that alphas produce to bend others to their will. The first power was the power of the blood itself, the original force from which all wolf gifts had sprung. An Omega Prime could suppress the shift of others or compel it. She could unhook Silver's effect on herself through will alone because Silver worked by disrupting the connection between wolf and blood, and the Omega Prime was the blood. She could not be suppressed because she was the source. And in her truest form, the Omega Prime shifted not into a large wolf or a powerful wolf or even a rare-colored wolf. She shifted into something that looked like a wolf the way that lightning looks like light. Present in the same family of things, but not the same thing at all. Sable had known what she was since she was 13. Her grandmother had told her. Her grandmother had been the last keeper of the true history in their bloodline, a woman of 70 with white locks down to her waist who had sat with young Sable in a small house at the edge of a forest and explained, in plain language, without fear, what the child was and what it meant. "It means you will be hunted," her grandmother had said. "Every alpha who learns of you will either want to possess you or destroy you. The ones who want to possess you are more dangerous than the ones who want to destroy you." Sable had asked, "What do I do?" Her grandmother had said, "You stay quiet. You keep your blood sleeping. You live a life that no one looks at twice. And when the day comes that you cannot stay quiet any longer, you will know. And on that day you do not hold back. Not one breath of it. You pour every drop of what you are into that moment, and you make sure that everyone who sees it understands exactly what they failed to prepare for." Sable had spent 9 years living quietly. She had moved to Caldenmore after her grandmother's death and lived as a healer, using only the small surface abilities that the bloodline allowed, the ability to speed the healing of others, to ease pain, to sense infection before it took hold. She had taken no mate. She had made no declarations. She had answered questions about her nature with silence until silence became her reputation and her reputation became her shield. The day the soldiers came for her, she had known it was beginning. She had felt the bloodlines stir in her chest the moment she saw them ride into the village, and she had thought, with a clarity that surprised even her, not yet. She had gone with them willingly. She had endured the court and the valley and the days of watching because she needed to understand the shape of what she was walking into before she moved. Her grandmother had told her this too. A flame does not need to burn constantly to be a fire. It needs to know when. Standing in the hollow with the silver cord on the ground in pieces, Sable felt the bloodline rising through her like water rising through cracked stone. It did not roar. It did not announce itself. It simply came, filling every space that the years of silence had hollowed out, steady and enormous and old. The hunter who had stopped 10 feet from her tried to speak. He could not. This was not a conscious choice on Sable's part. It was simply a property of what she was, that in the first moments of waking, the Omega Prime's presence compressed the air in a way that made casual action very difficult for anyone nearby. His mouth moved. No sound came. She walked toward the center of the valley. The fighting was still happening. The hunters were still advancing. But the wolves nearest to her began to stop because their instincts were overriding their fear of the hunters. Some dropped to one knee without knowing why they were doing it. Some backed away. The betas closest to her felt the urge to lower their eyes and could not explain the feeling. Breck was still fighting. He was a powerful enough alpha that the initial wash of her presence had not dropped him. He had a hunter by the throat and was squeezing with both hands, his face red with exertion, when he felt the change in the air. He looked over his shoulder. He saw the girl walking. He saw her eyes and something in his chest, in the animal place where alpha instinct lived, locked up so hard and so fast that he lost his grip on the hunter. He had never felt fear from another wolf. He had been the source of fear his entire life. But what he felt looking at her was not exactly fear, it was older than fear. It was the response of a wolf to a thing that ranked above every category it knew how to use. The hunter he had dropped scrambled back. Sable reached the center of the valley and stopped. She looked at the walls. She looked at the silver-laced stone, the ashroot packed into the mortar, the suppression architecture that Vareth's engineers had spent years perfecting. She breathed in once. She breathed out. The suppression field buckled. It did not collapse immediately. It resisted for perhaps 3 seconds, which was a significant amount of resistance for any single wolf to mount against architecture designed for an army. Then it shattered from the inside, the silver in the stone turning from a suppressive agent to something inert, the ashroot losing its potency, the careful binding of the design coming apart the way a tapestry comes apart when someone pulls the foundational thread. Across the valley, every wolf who had been unable to shift felt their connection to their animal self return. The shift began. Not controlled. Not chosen. The bloodlock breaking hit every wolf in the hollow at once, and they changed whether they meant to or not, bones reshaping, fur erupting, jaws extending, the small animal sounds of involuntary transformation filling the valley like a tide. The hunters had not been prepared for 80 wolves to shift simultaneously. The first 7 hunters died in the initial wave. Sable watched this happen and felt nothing except the steady presence of what she was, old and unmoved as a mountain watching weather. The remaining 13 hunters broke formation and ran for the gate. Wolves who had been prey for 8 days became predators in the span of a heartbeat, and the hunters discovered that the valley they had believed was a trap had become one, only not for the prey they had expected. 6 of the 13 made it to the gate. They beat on it from below, screaming for it to open. On the ridge above, Vareth watched all of this with his amber and red eyes narrowed to slits. He had his hands folded behind his back. He had watched his hunters broken in under 2 minutes. He had watched the suppression field, the most expensive and powerful architecture in his territory, dissolve as if it had never existed. He was watching the girl in the center of the valley. She had not shifted. She was still standing in human form in the middle of chaos, and the chaos was moving around her the way a river moves around a stone. His second in command, a scarred beta male named Drav, said quietly, "Alpha Lord, we should open the gate. Our men will be killed." Vareth said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Seal the outer ring. Nothing gets out." Drav stared at him. Our own men are at the gate. Vareth said, seal it. He could not take his eyes off the girl. He had spent 15 years building the Bloodthirsty Alpha's empire. He had faced 100 strong enemies and broken every one of them. He understood power. He had made himself the authority on what power looked like. What he was looking at was not a type of power he had a category for. And Alpha Lord Vareth, who had never in his life been afraid of anything, felt the first cold tendril of something that was not quite fear and was not quite recognition, but was somewhere between the two. He called for his scholars. He needed to know what that girl was. Below, Dessa had shifted back to human form and was standing 10 feet from Sable, breathing hard, her crooked arm hanging at her side. Around them the valley was quieting, wolves shifting back, the last sounds of the battle fading. Dessa looked at Sable. Sable looked back. Dessa said, very quietly, I knew it. Sable almost smiled. Chapter 3. The Alpha Who Does Not Kneel. The gate did not open. By midday the survivors understood that the suppression field being broken did not mean the walls were gone. The stone was still 20 feet high. The gate was solid iron 3 hands thick. They could shift now, they could fight, but they were still inside. Breck had organized the warriors into a loose council in the center of the valley. He had not asked Sable to join it. She sat on a flat rock 30 feet away and watched. Dessa was the only one who moved between the two groups. The council's argument was simple. They had the ability to shift now. They had numbers. They should rush the gate and break through. Breck held this position with the confidence of a male who had never met a wall he could not punch through if given enough time and force. Dessa said, the gate is 3 hands of iron. Even in full shift we do not have the weight to break it. Breck said, we have 80 wolves. Dessa said, and they have archers on the wall who are now reloaded and positioned. We saw them move into place an hour ago. If we rush the gate we will lose 30 wolves to the first volley. Breck said, then we lose 30 wolves and the rest go through. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when someone says something that is technically functional and morally hollow at exactly the same time. A young beta named Oran, who had not spoken much in 8 days, said quietly, I am not interested in being the 30. Several others murmured agreement. Breck swept the group with a glare that would have worked beautifully in any ordinary setting. It worked less well here because these were not ordinary wolves and they had been watching each other bleed for 8 days, and they were not impressed by glares anymore. Dessa said, there is another option. Breck said, the silent girl. Dessa said, yes. Breck said, she broke 1 field. That does not mean she can break walls. Dessa said, she broke an engineered suppression field that was supposedly permanent and unopposable by any single wolf. I think we should find out what else she can do before we decide that rushing the gate with 30 casualties is our best plan. Breck stood up to his full height. He crossed the distance between himself and Sable's rock in 8 strides and stood over her with his arms folded and his jaw set and his red braid over one shoulder. He said, Omega, we need to know what you can do. Talk. Sable looked up at him. She said nothing. Breck's jaw tightened. He said, this is not the time for silence. You broke that field. That was power. We need power right now. So speak. Sable held his gaze. He was enormous. He was intimidating in a way that was almost architectural, the way a cliff face is intimidating, purely by virtue of mass. His alpha presence pushed at her in the way it would push at anyone. She felt it the way she would feel a breeze. She stood up. Not because he had demanded it. Because she had decided. She was considerably shorter than him. Standing up brought the top of her head to roughly his collar. This did not seem to change the nature of the moment the way Breck had expected it to. She pointed to the northern wall. Then she pointed to the warriors in the council group. Then she pointed to Breck and made a motion with her hand that was unmistakably, stand back. Breck stared at her. Then, for reasons he would spend considerable energy denying later, he stepped back. Dessa had followed and was watching. She translated, though no translation was needed. She wants the warriors clear of the northern wall. The council moved. Some grudgingly, some quickly, all of them finding that the silver-eyed girl's silence communicated more authority than they wanted to acknowledge. Sable walked to the northern wall. She placed her palm flat against the stone. The wall was 20 feet of engineered stone packed with silver and ashroot and a binding compound that Vareth's engineers had spent 4 years refining. It was designed to withstand an army. It was designed to be permanent. She closed her eyes. Above the valley, on the northern ridge, the 4 archers stationed there felt something move through the stone under their feet. One of them stumbled. Another dropped to one knee, pressing his hand to the walkway, trying to understand what was happening beneath him. The wall cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. A single crack ran from her palm upward through the face of the stone, forking as it went, spreading like a river delta reaching the sea. The crack was thin as a thread at first. Then it was wide enough to put a finger in. Then it was wide enough to see light through. The ashroot in the mortar turned to powder. The silver went cold and inert the way it had in the suppression field, stripped of its property, left as mere metal. The wall did not collapse, not yet, but the structural integrity was gone. What remained was stone without coherence, held together by habit rather than design, ready to be pushed. She opened her eyes and looked back at Breck. He understood. He shifted. The wolf that came out of Breck was the size of a draft horse, red-furred and massive, and it hit the northern wall like a siege engine. The wall came apart at the first impact, stone tumbling outward, the gap widening as 2 more large wolves threw themselves into it beside him. In 40 seconds there was a gap 6 feet wide and rising. Dessa grabbed Sable's arm and pulled her toward the gap. Sable did not pull away. She ran. On the ridge above the gate, Vareth had heard the wall go. He turned and saw the cloud of stone dust rising from the northern side. For a moment he was still. Then he said to Drav, "Take 50 soldiers and seal the northern perimeter. Kill the warriors." Drav said, "And the girl." Vareth said, "Do not touch her." Drav looked at him. Vareth said, "I said what I said. The girl is mine. Bring her to me alive." He turned and walked back toward the main fortress, and his scholars who had arrived and were reading from crumbling old manuscripts looked up at him with pale faces. One of them, an elderly female wolf named Pris who had been the keeper of Vareth's restricted archives for 30 years, said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Alpha Lord. If what we have just witnessed is what I believe it to be, this is not something you can possess." Vareth stopped walking. He turned slowly. He said, "Everything can be possessed." Pris looked at him with eyes that had seen a great many things in a long life of careful study. She said, "Not this. Not ever this." "Alpha Lord, if that child is what I believe she is, then you are not her captor. You never were. From the moment she stepped into your valley, you were hers." Vareth's amber eyes were flat. He said nothing. He walked. But his hands, folded behind his back, had curled into fists so tight that his knuckles went white, and he did not unfold them for a very long time. Outside the broken northern wall, in the gray forest that ran for miles from the base of the Gray Fangs, 80 wolves and 1 silent Omega ran north. Behind them, 50 of Vareth's soldiers poured through the gap they had made. Dessa ran beside Sable and said, between breaths, "Can you fight?" Sable's gray eyes were still silver-edged. She glanced back at the soldiers. She held up 3 fingers. Dessa said, 3 minutes. Sable nodded. Dessa shouted to the warriors ahead of them. "Give her 3 minutes. Hold the soldiers for 3 minutes, then break north." Breck, still in wolf form, heard this and wheeled back. He had not agreed to take orders from Dessa. He had not agreed to take direction from a silent Omega girl. But he wheeled back and placed himself between the soldiers and the group with the reflexive efficiency of a war commander who understood, without being able to articulate why, that the plan was correct. 3 minutes. Sable stopped running. She turned to face the soldiers. And she began to shift. Drop a comment right now. Are you ready for what comes next? Subscribe and share this if the story has you gripped. Chapter 4. What the Omega Prime becomes. The shift of the Omega Prime is not like the shift of other wolves. For ordinary wolves, the shift is a violence done to the body. Bones breaking and reforming, muscles tearing and rebuilding in new configurations, skin splitting to let the fur through. It hurts. It is designed to hurt. The pain is part of what makes the wolf, the suffering that burns away everything soft and leaves only the animal. Sable's shift was silence. It was the way water becomes ice, without drama, without sound, simply one state of being becoming another. The human form she wore did not break, it unmade itself gently, and what replaced it came from somewhere older than flesh. The soldiers coming through the trees had stopped. They had stopped the moment she turned to face them, and they had not started again because something in the animal part of their minds was screaming that they should not approach what was ahead of them. The wolf that Sable became was large. Not Breck's kind of large, not the mass and muscle of a werewolf bred for power. She was the kind of large that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with presence. She was proportioned like the wolves in the oldest drawings in the oldest halls, drawn by artists who had seen the original and were trying to capture something they did not fully understand. Her fur was black. Not the dark gray or near black that some wolves carried. Absolute black, the kind that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, so that looking at her was like looking at a wolf-shaped hole in the world. Her eyes in wolf form were pure white. Not white like blindness. White like the center of something burning. She did not growl. She did not posture. She simply looked at the 50 soldiers in the trees ahead of her, and she let them see what she was. 12 of them broke immediately. Not in cowardice, or at least not in the ordinary kind. They broke because some instincts are older than training and older than loyalty and older than orders, and the instinct that ran through the wolf blood in every soldier there was older than all of those things, and it was saying, with the clarity of a bell, move. Move now. Not toward. Away. 12 ran. 38 stayed. Some because they were simply that strong, some because they were more afraid of Vareth than of what stood before them, some because they had not yet fully understood what their instincts were telling them. The commander of the unit was a large beta male named Tors. He had served Vareth for 20 years. He had been in 40 battles. He held his silver-tipped lance and his hand was perfectly steady, and he said to his soldiers, "Formation. Advance." They advanced. Sable moved. She did not attack the way wolves attack, the lunge and the bite and the leveraging of weight. She moved through the soldiers the way something elemental moves through a thing it encounters, not fighting the structure but making it irrelevant. Where she passed, the silver in their lances went cold. The ashroot compounds on their blades lost their potency. A soldier who swung his sword at her found that when the blade should have connected it did not because she had dodged, but because the blade seemed to move through her and leave nothing behind. She was not impervious to ordinary weapons. She was impervious to silver and ashroot, which was the foundation of everything Vareth's soldiers used to fight wolves. Without silver and ashroot, they were fighting a wolf. A very old, very powerful wolf. Tors lasted longer than any of the others. He was a 20-year veteran, and he had trained for contingencies. He shed his lance when the silver went cold and pulled a steel fighting knife and went at her low, trying to get inside her reach the way a small fighter takes a larger opponent. He was fast. He was precise. She caught his wrist in her jaws, not breaking it, simply holding it, and she put her white eyes on him. Tors went very still. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she released him. He stepped back. He did not advance again. Later, when asked about this by Vareth, Tors would say that he could not explain the choice. He could only say that when she looked at him, he understood something he had never understood before, which was that some things are not meant to be fought. The remaining soldiers fell back. Sable turned and ran north. She caught up to the warriors in the forest within minutes. They had heard the sounds of her engagement behind them, and most of them had slowed without deciding to, turning to look back into the trees. When she appeared from the dark between the pines in her wolf form, several of the warriors who had seen her shift felt the same locking instinct again, that deep internal genuflection that had nothing to do with their conscious choice. Breck was in human form again. He saw her coming, and he stood his ground when others stepped back, but his jaw was tight. Dessa said to the group, "Keep moving. We get to the Thornwood boundary and we stop. We are in territory Vareth does not easily cross there." They moved. The Thornwood was a forest at the northern edge of the Grey Fang's territory, belonging to a pack called the Thornwood Accord, a collection of smaller packs who had banded together 3 generations ago to maintain independence. Vareth had never formally invaded Thornwood because the Accord had alliances with the Eastern Sea Packs whose trade routes he needed. It was the one border he had not crossed. They crossed it at dusk. Sable shifted back to human form at the tree line. The shift back was as silent as the shift had been. The dark fur was gone, the white eyes, the presence. She was human again, standing in the last light in the plain clothes she had been taken in, and she looked, as Dessa had noted in the valley on the 4th day, exactly like someone you would not look at twice. Unless you knew what to look at. They stopped in a clearing 2 miles into the Thornwood. Warriors dropped where they stood, exhausted, some shifting back and curling on the ground in animal form, some sitting with their heads in their hands. Breck sat on a fallen log with his forearms on his knees and looked at Sable for a long time. Then he said, for the first time without command or contempt, "Will you tell us your name?" It was the first time he had asked instead of demanded. It was the first time anyone in the group had asked. Sable looked at him. She looked around the clearing at the exhausted warriors. 80 of them who had come in and now numbered 76, 4 lost in the escape through the gap and the chase through the forest. 76 wolves who were alive because she had decided the time had come to stop being quiet. She sat down on the ground across from Breck. She drew a letter in the dirt with one finger. S. Then a second. A. B. L. E. Dessa, sitting nearby, said quietly, "Sable." Sable looked at Dessa and nodded once. Breck repeated it to himself under his breath, as if testing the weight of it. Then he nodded once in return, a warrior's acknowledgement, slow and deliberate. The clearing was quiet for a long moment. Then Aran, the young beta who had said he was not interested in being among the 30 casualties, said from where he was lying on the ground, "Does she know where we go now?" Everyone looked at Sable. Sable looked up at the sky. The first stars were appearing. The Thornwood was quiet around them. Behind them, far back, the valley of the Hollow of Ruin sat broken and empty. She looked back at the group. She stood up. She pointed north. And she started walking. After a moment, Dessa stood and followed. After another moment, Breck stood and followed. 74 others rose from the ground and followed. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. She had already said what needed saying. Chapter 5. The last thing that Vareth builds. Vareth sent 4 separate tracking units into the Thornwood over the following 3 days. The first returned with 2 dead and 4 injured and reported that something in the northern Thornwood was making their wolves refuse to advance past a certain line of trees. They described the feeling as standing at the edge of a drop in complete darkness, knowing the drop was there but unable to see it, every instinct screaming retreat. The second unit did not return. The third returned intact, but their commander, a seasoned alpha female named Bryn, came to Vareth's hall and stood before him and said, "Alpha Lord, I will go back to the Thornwood for any reason you name. I will fight anything in that territory, any pack, any force, any number of enemies. I will not follow whatever is in the northern trees. I resign my commission before I do that." She left the commission badge on his table and walked out. The 4th unit was Tor's. Vareth had sent him because Tors had been in the valley. Tors had seen her and had not broken. Vareth thought that meant Tors could follow. Tors returned on the 3rd evening and sat across from Vareth in the hall and said, "I followed the trail to the northern edge of the Accord territory. The trail ends there." Vareth said, "They crossed the border." Tors said, "No, Alpha Lord. The trail does not go across the border. The trail simply ends." As if they left the ground. A silence followed. Tors said carefully, "I did not see the 2nd unit. I saw signs that they entered. I did not see signs that they left or were killed. I believe they are still in the Thornwood." Vareth said, "She took them." Tors did not answer this. It was not a question. Vareth sat back in his chair. He had been reading every text Pris had brought him about the bloodline. He had been reading for 3 days and sleeping very little. His amber eyes had the look that his people recognized from the deep campaigns, the look of a mind working on a problem it could not solve, but would not release. Pris was in the corner of the hall with 2 of her assistants, still reading, still cross-referencing. She had been doing this for 3 days too. Vareth said to her, "Pris, what do the texts say about taking them?" Pris looked up. She said, "The Omega Prime does not take in the way you mean. She does not command. She does not bind through dominance. What she does is closer to recognition. When she acknowledges a wolf, that wolf feels seen in a way they have never been seen before. And things that have been genuinely seen tend to follow the one who saw them." Vareth said, "And what do the texts say about what she is building?" Pris was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Every text that describes the emergence of an Omega Prime describes what follows as a gathering. She gathers. She does not conquer. But Alpha Lord, the thing she gathers and the thing you have built are not comparable. You have built your empire through force. What she gathers comes to her freely, and things that come freely do not leave." Vareth looked at his hands on the table. He said, "I want her brought to me." Pris said gently, "Alpha Lord." He said, "I heard what you said. I want her here. Not as a prisoner. I want to meet her." Pris was silent. He said, "Is there something in your texts about how one speaks to her?" Pris said, "The texts say that the Omega Prime does not grant an audience. She grants a presence. If she wants to speak with you, she will appear. If she does not, you can search every forest and every mountain and not find her." Vareth said, "Then what do I do?" Pris looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something she had never said to him in 30 years. She said, "You wait." Far north, in the deep thornwood, Sable had found what she had been looking for. It was an old place. Old in the way that certain forests are old, not in measurable years, but in the weight of what has happened there. A valley, smaller than the hollow of ruin, surrounded not by stone walls, but by trees that had grown together over centuries until their branches made a continuous canopy, a living ceiling that filtered the light into something dim and golden. Her grandmother had told her about this place. She had said, "When the time comes, you will know where to go. It will feel like remembering something you never learned." She had been right. Sable had walked into the northern thornwood, and the blood in her had tugged north and then northwest and then into the valley like a hand on her arm, gentle and insistent, the way her grandmother's hand had felt when she was small. The 76 warriors had followed her in. The second tracking unit was there. 8 wolves, sitting in a loose circle near the center of the valley, calm and quiet in a way that was different from the calm of people who are waiting. They had arrived looking for her, and they had found the valley, and they had sat down and not wanted to leave. Dessa had looked at them, and then at Sable and said, "You did not tell them to stay." Sable shook her head. The valley welcomed them. There was no better word for it. The air was warmer than it should have been in the northern forest. Water ran clean from a spring at the western edge. The trees provided shelter, and the canopy provided cover from anything that flew overhead. It was a place designed or grown to hold people. They built fires. They rested. On the second day in the valley, Breck came and sat across from Sable where she was tending the spring, and he said, "They are calling you something." She looked at him. He said, "The warriors. Not by name. They are calling you what you are. Not Omega Prime, they do not know that word. But they have their own word for it. They are calling you the Root." Sable was quiet. Breck said, "I have been an alpha my whole life. I have never called anyone above me. I want you to know that I say this without weakness and without shame. I would follow you." It was the longest speech he had made directly to her. She looked at him for a moment. Then she did something she had not done in 3 years. She spoke. Her voice was quiet. Not rough from disuse as voices sometimes are after long silences, but very, very calm, the way deep water is calm, the stillness of something too large to be disturbed. She said, "I do not want followers." Breck waited. She said, "I want wolves who choose. There is a difference." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What is the difference?" She said, "Followers go where they are told. Wolves who choose understand why and go anyway. I will not tell anyone what to do. But I will tell everyone the truth of what I know, and what I know is this. Vareth's empire is built on one thing. He makes wolves afraid, and then he gives them something to stand behind so the fear has a shape. Take away the fear and what he has built falls, because there is nothing underneath it. We are the underneath." Breck said, "We are 84 wolves in a forest." She said, "We are 84 wolves in a forest, and the ground we stand on is older than his walls and his silver and every architect he has ever hired. We are on the ground that remembers. He is standing on ground that he bought." Breck was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do we do?" She said, "We send word to every pack Vareth has suppressed, every territory he has swallowed, every wolf he has made afraid. We tell them we are here, and we tell them we are not running. And we wait to see who comes." Dessa, who had been sitting nearby and listening, said, "And when Vareth comes himself." Sable looked at the canopy above them, the ancient interlaced branches, the gold-filtered light. She said, "He is already coming. He has been coming since the day I stepped into his valley. He just does not know yet that when he arrives, it will not be to collect me." Dessa said, "What will it be?" Sable was quiet for a moment. She said, "It will be the end of something and the beginning of something else. What the something else is will be decided by every wolf who is here when it happens. That is the point. That is the whole point." She looked at Breck and then at Dessa. She said, "This valley is not a hiding place. This is a beginning." 3 weeks later, the valley held 412 wolves. They had come from 11 packs. From territories Vareth had swallowed and territories that had watched him swallow others and known they were next. They had come because the word had spread the way things spread when they are true, faster than control, wider than any single messenger could carry. They had come because someone had told them that in the northern Thornwood there was a place where the ground remembered and a wolf who stood on it who could not be suppressed or bound or made afraid. They had come to see. And what they saw, when they arrived, was a young woman of medium height sitting at the edge of a spring, tending a fire, her gray eyes watching the trees with a patience that had nothing to prove. And one by one they felt what every wolf before them had felt. Not fear. Not command. Recognition. The particular feeling of being seen clearly for the first time. Vareth came on the 43rd day. He came alone. This was his choice, not Sable's requirement. He had sent no message. He had not announced himself. He had simply ridden north into the Thornwood alone, leaving Drav in charge of the fortress, leaving his soldiers behind, and he had followed the thing that had been pulling at him since the 8th day of the valley siege, the pull he could not name and could not stop feeling. He reached the valley at midday. The wolves inside knew he was coming before he arrived. Not from scouts, though they had those. From the shift in the air that happens when a large predator approaches. 400 wolves went still and watchful. Sable walked to the edge of the valley and stood at the gap in the trees where the path came in. She was alone. She had refused the guards Breck had offered. Vareth came through the trees on horseback and stopped 10 feet from her. He looked down at her from the height of the horse with his amber and red eyes and his coal-black hair loose in the wind and his furs and his iron. She looked up at him. He dismounted. He was massive up close. This close, in the forest light, she could see that his eyes had more red in them than amber, and that the red was not cruelty alone, it was exhaustion. The long exhaustion of someone who had been powerful for so long that they had forgotten what they were powerful for. He said, "I expected more guards." She said, "You do not need guards when the forest itself knows whose side it is on." He was quiet. He looked at the canopy. He looked at the valley behind her, at the smoke of the fires and the movement of 400 wolves going about the work of a community. He said, "I have been building for 15 years. I built the Hollow of Ruin to make strong things break. I built an empire to make the North afraid." She said, "I know." He said, "None of it was enough." She said, "It never is. That kind of building never has an end, because it is built on hunger and hunger does not fill." He looked at her. She could see him working through something. The kind of internal work that large, proud males do very badly and very slowly because they have spent their whole lives being told they have nothing to work through. He said, "What do you want?" She said, "What I have." "What is here?" He said, "And what about me?" She looked at him clearly. She said, "That depends entirely on you. I cannot want something for you that you have not chosen. That is not how this works. What I can tell you is that you are standing on old ground and it knows you and it has not rejected you yet, which means you still have a choice." He said, "You would not try to bind me. Force me." She said, "I do not force anything. Not ever." He said, "Then why do 400 wolves follow you?" She said, "Because I told them the truth and let them decide. That is all." He was quiet for a long time. The forest was quiet around them. In the valley behind her, the fires burned and the wolves moved and the spring ran and the old trees breathed. He looked at the ground under his feet. He looked at her. He said, "I do not know how to be what you are describing." She said, "No one does." That is the beginning. The long silence stretched between them. Then Alpha Lord Vareth, who had not lowered himself before any living thing in 15 years of building an empire, lowered his head. Not a bow. Not a submission. The way you lower your head when you are setting down something heavy that you have been carrying too long. Sable looked at him. She said, quietly, "Come in." He followed her into the valley. The Bloodthirsty Alpha's empire did not fall in a day or a week or even a season. Empires built on fear have roots that take time to rot. But rot they did, steadily and without drama, as the wolves Vareth had suppressed understood that the force suppressing them had changed, and as the word of the valley and the thornwood spread further and further into the territories. Sable did not declare herself anything. Not queen. Not leader. Not alpha. She was the root. The word the warriors had given her had spread along with the rest of the story, and wolves who had never met her and never entered the valley used it when they spoke of what was happening in the north. Something has changed in the north. The root is there. The ground remembers. She spent her days as she had always spent her days before the soldiers came, tending, listening, healing the ones who arrived broken, sitting at the edge of the spring with her pale gray eyes open and her presence steady as a mountain. She spoke when speech was needed and was silent when silence served better, and she was getting more comfortable with both again. Dessa became the voice she used when her own was not the right one for the moment. Breck became the force she sent forward when force was genuinely needed, which was less often than he had expected and which he slowly, grudgingly, with enormous resistance and then real relief, began to understand. Vareth was harder. He stayed in the valley. He had no intention, stated or otherwise, of returning to his fortress. He was too large and too prideful and too thoroughly himself to fold quietly into the community the way some of the others did. He argued with Breck constantly and Breck argued back, and these arguments were so loud and so sustained and so completely unresolvable that they somehow became a structural feature of how decisions got made. A two-sided grinding that produced something close to wisdom when Dessa and Sable added a third angle to the friction. On the night of the 100th day in the valley, Sable sat at the spring alone. The fires were burning. The valley breathed around her. She could feel every wolf in it the way a root feels the trees above it, as weight and warmth and the slow exchange of what sustains things. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of the small house at the edge of the forest and the white locks and the plain language and the instruction she had carried for 9 years. Stay quiet. Keep your blood sleeping. And when the day comes that you cannot stay quiet any longer, you will know. She had known. She knew now that what she had built was not finished. It would not be finished in her lifetime. What she had begun was the kind of thing that grows for generations, changes shape, adapts, loses some of what it started with and gains things that could not have been predicted. That was not a failure. That was the point. A fire does not stay in the place where it started. It travels. It consumes what needs consuming and leaves behind the ground where something new can grow. She was the fire. She had always been the fire. And the ground behind her was already, quietly, beautifully, beginning to bloom. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If this story moved you, subscribe right now and turn on the bell. Leave a comment below telling us your favorite moment. Like this video and share it with someone who needs a story about a wolf who refused to break. We will see you in the next one.